Book 4, Falcon in the Barn, Chapter 17. He's gone fishing, Thorn. He returns tomorrow. In Idemia, it was impossible to not hear the news. Everyone was yelling it in the administrative headquarters and at the garrison a few miles away. And soon everyone in the great city was shouting, "Did you hear what happened in Moreland?" Chairman Nico Mal was sure the large sealed folder that the messenger from Quake rushed to him late in the afternoon was supposed to be confidential. But as the corporal shouted through the vast halls of the administrator's headquarters, it was apparent no one had told him that. "The commanders in the north have killed all the garters in Moreland. The garters are gone." His fellow messenger was just as naively vocal, as he rode shouting through the garrison to deliver his copy of the report from Major Fod to High General Cush. Mal heard later that there was a crowd of officers and soldiers waiting impatiently outside the High General's door. Mal believed it because when he finally opened his office door, after staring dazedly for many minutes at Fod's report, he was met by administrators, assistants, workers, and citizens who happened to be in the building. They clogged the hall like starved mutts waiting for a bone. The chairman had to publicly rejoice for the wild success of the army and the increased safety of the people. But Nico felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. He couldn't quite catch his breath for the better part of an hour, and desperately wished Dr. Brizek would return a day early from his fishing trip to tell him what to think about this unprecedented failure. Success. Whatever. In the meantime, the world sat panting at his door. Once he finally opened it, he knew there was only one possible response. "Citizens of Idemia and the world, rejoice! A most remarkable thing has happened in the north." "But it's a disaster!" Cain Thorne snarled at him hours later. Nico massaged his temples, having seen others do it, and wondered what it was supposed to accomplish. His office at the administrative headquarters had grown dark with the evening, but he'd lit only 2 candles, hoping the dim light would calm the pounding in his head. Next, he'd need to find a way to slow the erratic beating of his heart. "Do you realize that?" The general leaned over his desk. Mal slowly looked up at him with a glare that could have crumpled a boulder. "You really don't think I don't know the severity of the situation, Thorne? Dead 267, missing and presumed dead more than 40, men we've been training for years, new recruits we brought on for the onslaught of Edge using Brizek's mixture. You think I don't realize the scale of the problem, Thorne stood back up and straightened his jacket. "So, what are you going to do?" And he added a respectful, "Sir." "I'm waiting for Brizek," Mal told him, abandoning the useless head-rubbing. Instead, he took a deep breath and blew it out of his mouth. Brizek had told him to breathe slowly in instances like this, but there was no easing of the stabbing pain growing in his chest and radiating down his arm. At home he had some of that brew of the doctor's, but he should have kept some in his office. "Brizek will have a better report. We had around 330 men from our best estimates. That's what he was to discover, too, a full count. Along with doing other things," he added in a whisper. Cain rolled his eyes impatiently. "Mal, you have to face the fact that Brizek is dead. One of those 267, probably blown apart by his own brilliant explosion," he added with a disgusted head shaking. "He's gone." "He wouldn't dare," Mal said stoically. He alone knew the entire formula, but he was going to train some men up there in it. Many would know it now. According to the sizes of the blast described by Fod, the good doctor got the formula right. Mal tried massaging his hands while his eyes darted all over his desk, as if in search of something he knew he'd never find. "Exploding key sections of Edge can still happen, mark my words. When Brizek returns tomorrow, He'll bring me the details. Oh, yes, he will. And we'll begin again. I have complete faith in him. You shouldn't doubt him, Cain." General Thorne leaned across the desk, forcing an uncharacteristically timid Mal to look into his eyes. "Chairman, it's not that I doubt the administrator of family life. It's just that I doubt that he's still alive." Mal slammed his fist on the desk. "He's gone fishing, Thorne. He returns tomorrow." "Just like Gadaman?" Thorne pressed. Something caught in Mal's throat, making it impossible for him to respond. That is, if he knew how to respond. "Gadaman's been missing for a year now," Thorne pointed out, and Mal was startled to realize that it had been so long. "And are you still expecting they'll find him in that office of his under all of those crates? You know, he has a few loyal assistants who have been collecting more names and information that could feed your so-called studies. But you've been too obsessed with one colonel in the North to notice. Yet, interestingly, all of your preoccupation with Shin hasn't resulted in his demise, but our own." Thorne leaned in so close that Mal couldn't back out of his spitting range. "Are you sure you really know what you're doing with all of this, Nico? Or is it time for some new leadership?" "There's only so many stabs in so many sensitive places that one man can allow," Mal snapped. "General, I'm thinking of some new leadership in place of you. Get out before I strip you of command. All of them." General Thorne stood up, deliberately slowly, and cocked his head. "Ask yourself this. How did the northern forts know about what was going on in Moreland? Who tipped them off? I believe you're losing control of the world, Chairman. Gadaman's long dead, it's obvious. Get over it because someone, somewhere, knows about your secrets and is talking, maybe even to Shin himself." "Not Zenas the Quiet Man," Mal insisted. "He didn't know about this." Thorne shrugged. "You need a new administrator of loyalty with a heavy fist to pound the truth out of a few people. Unfortunately, I'm already overloaded with work, or I'd volunteer for the job." "Then again," Thorne said with such smugness that it should have been a crime, "if you keep letting things slide, maybe I'll just take over your positions. All of them." Mal didn't rub his aching chest until Thorne had slammed the door behind him. "Slag, I hate that man. Why couldn't he have been in Moreland?" The cat, as the tiny creature that invaded the Shin household was immediately not named, followed Perrin everywhere. It was supposed to be Jatesy's, but as soon as Perrin appeared, the cat ran to him and climbed up his leg to perch on his shoulder, digging into Perrin's flesh with his, Shem identified the gender, tiny claws that left needle-like gashes. Every night in bed, Perrin found himself pulling the kitten off his chest. He tried once leaving it out of the room and closing the door, but its constant high-pitched meowing disturbed him even more than its purring. And, in a way, Perrin admitted on the fourth night, the purring did have a rather calming quality about it. And the kitten purred only for him, and it was needy. And he was in charge of seeing to the needs of all those in the village. In the end, it took only a week for the kitten to conquer the colonel. The world was completely upside down, Perrin realized, because he now willingly owned a cat. There were 2 chairs in a dark office of an unlit building, but only one man. A week had passed since the report arrived about the incident in Moreland, and still that chair remained empty. Nico Mal stared dully at it. In his hand was a note from Mrs. Brizak begging to know if the chairman had heard anything from her husband. Mal tapped his fingers on the armrest. He leaned forward aggressively. He sat back worriedly. Then he crumpled the message and dropped it on the floor on top of Major Fodd's report. Dr. Brizak was never late for a meeting before. The world was completely upside down now, and Nico needed 2 new administrators. Perrin becoming a cat owner wasn't the only unusual thing that happened the next few weeks. 2 new administrators were named in an announcement that was delivered first to the fort, then the next day to the public in general. Mari and Perrin read and reread the contents of the message, trying to find hidden meanings between the lines. "Doesn't seem right," Mari said on her 4th chime through it. "Gadaman's been ill for over a year, and only now they've decided to replace him?" "I don't think he was ever ill," Perrin told her quietly. "I suspect he's dead. He wasn't at my hearing, and I wonder if anyone had seen him since. I asked Thorne about it once. He said he hadn't seen Gadaman the last 2 times he was in Idamia, and usually he met with him as a formality during command school." "Thorne would meet with Gadaman?" Mari asked, immediately suspicious. "That doesn't seem right either." "That's what I thought, but he wouldn't say anything more about it. Nor did I want to continue the conversation any longer than necessary. But Brizak, that's even more mysterious." "Presumed missing in a fishing trip," Mari reread the words. "He never told us he was coming, did he?" Perrin shook his head. "It says only that he was heading north for a holiday 4 weeks ago and hadn't been heard from since." Mari went pale and she grabbed her husband's arm. "Perrin, I just remembered. At the dinner last year, didn't he say they were experimenting with sulfur? I thought he also mentioned something about Moreland, about wanting to get new samples." "What are you suggesting?" "Something awful. Perrin, what if Brizak was in Moreland during your attack? What if it was him experimenting with that black powdery substance? You said it smelled sulfur-based." Perrin scoffed. "Mari, we're talking about Dr. Brizak. The man wasn't perfect, but you liked him, remember?" Mari didn't answer that. How much could she approve of a man who wanted reports on how her husband was responding to secret testing? Perrin broke into her thoughts with, why would Brizak be experimenting with garters anyway? Mari shrugged. While she didn't approve of Brizak's meddling, she did have to acknowledge that he'd been most helpful in sending the sedation, and seemed earnest in his frequent messages to know how Mari was doing, although she never answered the nosy old man's queries. "I don't know what I was thinking," she said dismissively. "It just seems that, well, would you have been able to recognize any of the bodies at the crater?" "No," he told her gruffly. "Burned beyond recognition." Mari winced and nodded. "Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. Do you know anything about this new administrator of loyalty, Mr. Genev? Is he as paranoid as Gadaman was?" "Evaluating paranoia is such a subjective thing," Perrin sighed, with more experience than he wanted to admit. "Genev was his assistant for quite some time, so things should be about the same for the Office of Loyalty." Mari bit her lip. "Is that good or bad?" "As long as there is an office," Perrin said, instinctively glancing around him for a red coat and white ruffles that might be peering into their gathering room windows. "It's bad." Mari fidgeted with worry. "Then what about Brizak's replacement?" Perrin shook his head. "I don't know anything about him. Worked in Brizak's office for a while, but I don't remember meeting him." Mari pondered. "Perhaps all of these changes are why we haven't heard any response from the administrators about your attack on Moreland." "Or maybe they've forgotten all about me," Perrin smiled. "You cannot be serious!" General Thorne bellowed at the chairman. Nico merely raised his eyebrows and looked over at the High General to see if he would rein in his hound. "KN," his father-in-law said consolingly, "think about it. What else can be done? Besides, all of the administrators have agreed. You could, Cain faltered, gesturing madly. Or you could, his hands continued to flap uselessly, as if somehow they would smack randomly into a different solution. Mal clasped his hands calmly in front of him. He had drained the entire bottled heart concoction he had acquired from an associate of Brizak's that morning, just in anticipation of this meeting. You see the problem, don't you? He's been nothing but loyal. So loyal that he even violated his probation to save your son. How exactly are we to punish loyalty, General Thorne? Cain scoffed, gestured, started and stopped and foamed in exasperation, but he had no response. Eventually, he slumped in his chair. So he just gets off? Mal rolled his eyes very slowly to make sure General Thorne got the message. It's an excellent strategy until we get a new one. High General Cush cleared his throat. I'm not hearing this, you understand. I'm just here to give my approval and also to tell General Thorne that he'll deliver this news personally. Cush absent-mindedly rubbed his own chest. Mal wondered if the High General had his own supply of heart tonic. He was pale enough to need some. Thorne glared at his father-in-law. Me? Why me? Cush chuckled in his normal way, which today sounded as natural as an ox laughing. Because I'm simply not up to it. A bead of sweat formed on his broad forehead. And because you're going there will demonstrate to the world the honor and veneration the Army has for the Colonel, just as the rest of the world feels for him. And you're also to check on my grandson. 30 stitches. Make sure they sewed him up correctly, nothing dangling out. Thorne pursed his lips in thought. Lemuel's been exceptionally slow in a few things. I do want to see what's happening, especially with the Shin girl. Maybe if I can get her alone. Even I don't think that's a good idea, Mal said with a squint. He knew very little about teenage girls, but even he could tell that Thorne's idea was worse than saddling a skunk. Lemuel has to win that Shin girl over himself, when the time is right. Something like that, he waved vaguely. Thorne grumbled. Says Ursula as well. So, he exhaled moodily, I get to go to the edge of the world then? The chairman shook his head. I don't understand you, Cain. You have everything. Second in command of the army and at a relatively young age. Possession of the third largest home in Idamia. Rank of general, which is one higher than him. A son who's the youngest captain in the army. And you have the ear of the most powerful man in the world, me. What more could you want? Thorne glared. Him dead. No, you don't, Mal smiled narrowly. What you want is him tormented. Cush stood up abruptly, quite the feat for a man of his diameter, and he huffed to catch his breath from the exertion. I'm not listening anymore, you know that. Cain, you're going to edge, and you're going to put on a face fitting for a man whose subordinate has just handed him a most welcome victory. I'll see you at the garrison. Cush wheezed and left the office, slamming the door behind him. It's about time he left, Mal said, watching the door. If he keeps up this interference, he'll have to take the oaths. I don't understand why he's so opposed to that. Misplaced loyalties to a dead friend, I suppose. He shifted his earnest gaze to General Thorne. Cain, if Shin's dead, he's no fun, and we'll need to find a new Falcon. But there simply isn't one as complex and intriguing as him. To be honest, I rather miss Ralph. I miss his exasperation and his cluelessness, and the fact that I knew exactly what was causing his trouble, but he could never figure it out. There was great pleasure in watching his frustration. You really don't want to end that so soon with Perrin. I certainly don't. We're laying a new foundation to test him with. and while I don't entirely know what the structure will come of it, I promise you that it will be most magnificent and worth the wait. And you, Kay and Thorn, will have a front row seat to it all, and you will watch Perrin Shin squirm and shrivel." Thorn slowly nodded his head. "I hadn't seen it in that way," he said thoughtfully. "The reports from Lemuel last year had been most entertaining about the Colonel and his madness. Rather miss hearing about his rants." "Give me some time, Kay, and you'll be entertained again," Mal assured. "When a man has fallen to such depths, it takes very little to push him back into it again. We just have to prepare the right hole. In the meantime, you'll go to Edge, and you'll smile at the Colonel because you're on top of the world, and you know that soon he'll be in yet another pit." "One where I stand above him and spit on his head?" Thorn asked. "Bucketfuls," Mal promised. Knock, 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 knock. "Wonderful," Perrin sighed to himself. "He's mobile." He stretched his fingers before saying a bit drearily, "Come in." The door opened, not too slowly, not too quickly, and there stood a pale Captain Thorn. "Should you be up and in uniform?" Perrin asked, hoping against hope the captain was disobeying the surgeon's orders. But on his desk was the report of which men were fit to return to duty that day, and Thorn was on the top. Apparently Stitch was as eager to release him as Perrin was that he should stay in the hospital wing. "I am, sir," Thorn said proudly. "I need to take it easy still, but I promise it won't affect any of my performance, sir." "Which performance?" Perrin nearly said out loud. "The one where you pretend to be an obedient and diligent officer, or the one where you try to find ways to undermine me?" "I'm sure you won't, Captain," he said, turning again to the work on his desk. "Sir," Thorn ventured, "may I say something?" Perrin gritted his teeth and looked up. "Of course, Captain." "About Moreland?" "Don't say it," Perrin thought to himself. "Don't you dare thank me for saving you from that garter. Don't you dare remind me." "I think you made the correct decision, sir," Thorn said. "Breaking your probation, your presence secured our victory. The world is safer because of you." Oh, the little manipulator was clever. Now Perrin was going to have to say the words. There was no other response he could offer that would be appropriate. "Thank you, Captain." Perrin nearly choked. "I'm certain, sir, that when the garrison responds to our success, they'll be cognizant of the fact that you had no other alternative but to behave in the manner that the situation demanded," said Thorn in fluent army speak. "I even wrote to my father and grandfather affirming that, sir." Oh, the words had to be said again. "Thank you," Perrin said as dully as he dared. "Dismissed." Later that day, a decision from Idemia came in the form of a little man in a red messenger suit. He brought the news that General Cain Thorn was on his way to personally congratulate the fort at Edge on the success of the offensive. Everyone in the Forward Command office had stood in silent terror at the news. 5 seconds later, every man, except Colonel Shin, was running frantically down the stairs to deliver the word that the fort needed to be prepared for an official visit the next day. Perrin merely nodded at the message and folded it again. "Well then, soon we'll see, won't we?" he murmured to himself. "Will I be a general, a lieutenant, or a guard at the edge of Idemia Estates? It'll only be for a year. Then we'll have proof that all the garters are gone, and the forts will be irrelevant. Maybe." Over dinner, Perrin broke the news to his family. "Time to get a new jacket, Father?" Peto said with a grin. Mari sighed. "Maybe one with a single lieutenant's braid." "They wouldn't do that to him," Peto declared. How could they? And why else would General Thorne come all this way? To check on his son, I think, Perrin said. Make sure he's healing well, that everything else is progressing as he thinks it should. He glanced at his daughter, who had stopped eating. Well, Murray said decisively, we just won't fret about it. Nothing we can do. We'll just accept what happens and trust in the Creator. Yes, fine. Will be a pleasant visit, no doubt. Very convincing, Murray. Colonel Shin was ready the next day for the arrival of General Thorne. Everyone was ready. The fort was spotless. Even the dirt on the stable floors had been smartly raked. The men were nervous, which made them each stand a little taller. Captain Thorne was so agitated in the command tower that when Zenas accidentally dropped the long knife he used to pry open a stuck window, Lemuel drew his sword in readiness. Perrin rather enjoyed it all. He'd never been on this side before. He didn't really care about what would happen that day, and he found that thought surprisingly freeing. He'd waited before for the worst the hierarchy could dish out, and the worst was, well, the past year had been bad, but it was only temporary. He realized he could handle anything temporarily. He sat serenely at his desk reviewing reports, not even looking out the window like the tense corporal who was filing the papers. Perrin was sure the young man would alert him when someone was coming, and he was right. He hardly recognized the high-pitched squeak as human until he looked up at the scared soldier. "Blue Banner, sir! Far South Tower, he's been sighted approaching edge!" Perrin nodded sedately. "Good. Now gather up all the papers you dropped and refile them, please. We still have a little time." With another squeak of compliance, the soldier was on the floor. A few moments later, Captain Thorne stood at the door. "Sir?" "You'd like to meet your father at the gate, Captain?" "Yes, sir, if you don't mind." The colonel shrugged. "Bring him up here when he's done with his inspection. I've got a few things to wrap up first." He didn't add, "before I'm demoted and you're replaced in command over me." Perrin didn't need any warning to know when General Thorne arrived at the command tower a while later. The sound of scuffling boots and frantic calls for "attention" were heard throughout the building. Perrin slowly rose from his desk, walked casually to the door of his office, and stood in the forward command office just as General Thorne jogged up the stairs. He gave Colonel Shin a surprisingly warm and generous smile. Perrin concluded that Cain must have practiced it at the dinner 2 moons ago. "Perrin, wonderful to see you again. This place is a marvel. Your father didn't do it justice in his descriptions. Absolutely amazing. We should be replicating this fort design all over the world." With his hand gloved in black, General Thorne pumped Colonel Shin's hand vigorously, and Perrin wondered for a moment who was this cheerful man, wearing Cain Thorne's face in uniform. Only a year ago he held a sword to Perrin's head. The look in his eyes at the time begged for any reason to thrust. Perrin put on his own dinner smile as well. "General, I hope your trip up here was pleasant. Good time of year to be traveling." "Very pleasant, thank you." He continued to smile in a manner that made Perrin think of cheese left out in the sun, hard and a bit sweaty. "Hi, General Cush was hoping to accompany me, but he's been unwell. His health has been slowing him down, but he sends his regards." "Perrin, I never realized how remarkable the scenery up here is. Up close, the mountains are almost worth looking at. No wonder Lemuel was eager to return. He looks good, and his side is healing nicely. Been treated well here, I can see. We could hardly keep him in Idemia. I suppose he finds the north most appealing." Captain Thorne stood behind his father, still stiffly at attention, but beaming. "Well," Perrin tried to think of the best way to put it, "Edge wouldn't be the same without him, sir." Something caught his eye, just above General Thorne's name patch. It was a pin of gold, about half the size of his thumb, the shape of which stopped Perrin from breathing. The general noticed. "Beautiful craftsmanship, isn't it? Best goldsmith in Idemia made it. Mal has commissioned a few more to be presented to all future generals in the army." His next sentence was completely unnecessary. "It's a mountain lion." Perrin barely nodded as he stared at the dangling object, which was the outline of a prowling mountain lion. Its front paw was raised in anticipation, its shoulders hunched in the same posture of the cat when he was about to pounce on a floating piece of fluff. "Interesting," he said, hoping he sounded uninterested. Cain continued his mucky cheese smile. "A symbol to remind the citizenry." His voice was far too jovial, and it was clear he wasn't used to doing jovial. "After all, mountain lions are known for their courage, their tenacity." "Their ability to sneak up and bite your throat out," Perrin supplied to himself. He glanced behind Thorn to see Zenas standing at the top of the stairs, his eyes slightly narrowed in uneasiness. "Fitting reminders for the world that the army of Idemia is here to protect their interests," Cain finished. Perrin heard multiple layers of meaning in Thorn's proclamation. "How interesting," he said again. General Thorn slapped him genially on the back. "And gloves now too, sir?" Perrin asked as he watched Thorn meticulously pull off the thin, form-fitting black gloves. Perhaps he wore them only for patting Perrin on the back. "Of course," Cain said, again with too much jolliness. "Gives a more complete look to the uniform and keeps one's hands clean." "From what kind of filth?" Perrin nearly blurted. Cain Thorn pocketed his gloves after fastidiously folding them. "Let's go sit down in your office, Perrin. We have lots to talk about. Captain Thorn, please join us." "Yes, sir," the captain chirped. Perrin held out his arm for the two Thorns to go into his office. One brief facial tick told Zenas to sit down at the large front desk and be ready for anything. The cotton was still on the bookshelf, so eavesdropping would be easy. Colonel Shin followed the Thorns into the office and shut the door. Zenas sat down at the large desk, motioned to the other soldiers to get back to work, then leaned back in the chair, picked up a manual whose title he wouldn't remember later, and rocked the chair back to lean against the wall underneath Heisemum's purple and yellow edge banner. Mari could hardly concentrate on school that day. Twice one of her students set fire to another student's trouser leg, and she didn't notice until he did a stomping dance in the aisle. Peto worriedly watched his mother during midday meal. He couldn't concentrate either, especially once they saw the blue banner go up at the tower nearest the school. "Think he's going to be in trouble?" Peto asked. "He's always in trouble," Mari muttered as she fussed with her sandwich. When they left the school in a fast march home, Jatsi caught up to them. "Any news yet?" "No," Mari said, "but I don't expect any until dinner." "Or maybe earlier," Jatsi said as they turned onto the alleyway to the house. Perrin's latest horse, a white gelding, was tethered to the fence. Mari stopped. She had a habit of running through her mind every scenario she could imagine, then anticipating how she'd react when it happened. Yet it always seemed to be the unanticipated option that occurred, leaving her shocked at the outcome despite her hours of mental preparation. Someday she would learn to quit planning ahead. No scenario that she anticipated had him home early. She started walking again. "Maybe he's just there to check on the cat." "Of course," Peto said dismally. When they entered the kitchen, Perrin turned partially in surprise, his back still to them. "Oh, I thought you'd still be a few minutes." "Why are you here?" Mari asked, her tone full of dread. "To check on the cat," he told her. "Uh-huh," Peto said. "Well, I got one right," Mari said more to herself. "No, really, why?" Perrin's arm tried to drop subtly to his side, and a small mew fell to the ground. His forced smile was outlined in pain as the cat climbed back up his trousers leg. I have news, and I need to go back to the fort soon. I just needed to get an early dinner. As the family sat down apprehensively at the table, Peto bounced in his chair. Anything about Idemia? Yes, Perrin said. We're not going there. A purring sound began from his lap. Mari and Jatsi sighed in relief. Peto just sighed. I've not been promoted to general, Perrin continued, nor have I been demoted. It seems the army, upon the advice of the administrators, has decided that before a colonel can be promoted to general, he must serve as a full colonel for 3 years, unless there are extenuating circumstances, which circumstances have yet, of course, to be determined. In any case, I have nearly 2 more years until I'm eligible to become a general. That's trash, Peto yelled. That's politics, Perrin clarified. Same thing, though. Mari breathed easier every minute. There's more, he added with a smile. My probation has been lifted. I'm to be awarded a new medal for services above and beyond the call of duty or something wordy like that. I get another Officer of the Year proclamation, which I'll just slide next to the other ones on the shelf. And, he paused for effect, tonight the fort is to be officially renamed. That's why I'm here now. I need to change into my dress uniform, although I don't really see the need, and you all need to be dressed up as well. Sorry. Renamed? Mari asked. Yes, he sighed. Fort Shin. So they're promoting the fort instead of you, Jatsi clarified. You're getting smarter every day, Jates, Perrin pointed at her. This way I'm honored, without anyone having to actually do, concede, admit, sacrifice, or change anything significant. They just tack a few meaningless letters up on a wall, some self-important men say some forgettable words, a few people cheer without knowing why, because that's what they're expected to do, and then everyone decides they're satisfied. That, Peto, is politics. Well, I'm satisfied, Mari said, putting her head down on the table in relief. She lifted it back up. So nothing's really changed, has it? Well, there's a new symbol for the generals, Perrin said, trying not to clench his teeth. Thorn wore it proudly on his uniform, just above his name patch, a pin in the shape of a mountain lion. What, a big kitty cat? Peto sneered. Ooh, scary. Mari didn't say anything, except met her husband's careful gaze that said much more. Jatsi looked nervously at her parents. Some believe that cats are highly underrated, Perrin told his children. He and Mari had never told them of Kay and Thorn admiring a cat's ability to torment a wounded falcon trapped in a barn, nor that he used that story to explain to Shem the way garters saw the world. And a mountain lion, there's no deadlier animal, Peto. It can sneak up behind you and take you out with one swat of its claws or one bite of its jaws. You shouldn't trust it, even when it's purring. There is something more, Perrin continued. There's no sign of garter activity anywhere, not even in trades or the gold mine. They all must have moved up north, all of them. General Thorn has been watching, but so far, nothing. We may have finally dealt them a death blow, once and for all. Mari was surprised at his tone. It was much heavier than she expected. Just a few nights ago, he was bouncing happily like a teenage boy in a knife shop. But something today had sucked all the potential joy out of him. She was just about to ask what was wrong when Peto spoke. So what will they need generals for, or even an army? Well, Peto, Mari started, when she realized some of her husband's old brooding had returned. If we no longer have an enemy to fight, then your father can go on and do whatever he wants to. She watched Perrin closely, who was staring at a knothole in the wood, and likely scratching the cat's head, judging by the movement of his arm. "Would they just get rid of the fort?" Peto asked, shocked. Perrin finally sighed. "I spoke to General Thorne about that. I suggested that if in a year there's no sign of garters, that maybe we can relax a few things, reduce the army, maybe even let people explore the forests and beyond." Jatesy sat up taller. "Why, that'd be amazing!" Her father only shrugged at that. "Yes, it would be. But that's not how Thorne and Cush and the garrison see things." Mari squirmed in her chair, discouraged to see her husband so low again. "Why? What did Kay and Thorne say?" Perrin looked up at her, his eyes clouded. He said, "Why in the world?" And he used language a bit uglier than that, but I promised I wouldn't use that word in the house again. "Why would we want to do anything to reduce the army and its influence?" Then he said something I don't believe, but apparently everyone in the garrison does. "Colonel Shin, there are always more enemies." Mari felt something inside recoil, and noticed the worried looks on her children's faces as well. Perplexed, she asked, "But, Perrin, what would that other enemy be?" He shook his head slowly. "I guess that's the real question now, isn't it? Who are the mountain lions stalking today?" Knock, knock. Knock, knock, knock. Perrin looked up at the roof and wondered how hard it'd be to construct an escape hatch. He could reach it if he stood on his desk. "Come in." Captain Thorne opened the door and beamed. It was as genuine as the light of the moons, borrowed from some other source. "Sir, I just wanted to be the first this morning to tell you how proud I am that your name now graces the walls of the fort where I serve." He was doing it again, trying to squeeze himself under Perrin's wing, to make himself appear so accommodating, so necessary, so important. And worse, trying to make Perrin say those ingratiating words, "thank you." There was immense power in someone thanking you that elevated the receiver of the thanks, and made the speaker of the words somehow equal, no, somewhat subservient to whom he thanked. But Perrin had a different strategy this time. "I appreciate the sentiment, Thorne." He appreciated the falsity that was employed to make the captain seem sincere. "I look forward to seeing you someday wear the label of general, sir," Thorne added with a small smile. "And I imagine you may want to take a vacation for a time, now that you are no longer confined to Edge. I've checked the files and you rarely leave the fort. You have several weeks available to you, sir. Perhaps after such a long year, and with the threat of garters eliminated because of your exceptional leadership." Perrin really needed to find a way to keep his stomach from churning. "I wanted you to know that should you feel the desire to take Mrs. Shin somewhere for a well-deserved rest, I can certainly handle things here." Perrin rubbed his forehead. "Smooth. Usher out the commander. Take over the fort. At least Shem was always here. And since he was a sergeant major, they didn't need to replace Benniff, who, after weeks of searching, was still unaccounted for. They concluded he was lost in Moorland." "I have no doubt you could handle things here," Perrin said heavily. "However, I feel no need to leave. Edge is my home." Thorne shifted his position slightly. "Not that I'm trying to send you away, Colonel," he simpered. "I just want you to know that you can rely on me as second in command." There it was again, that reminder, as if someone suffering from the stomach flu needed reminding of his ailment. Was the stench not enough? And in this case, the stench was lavender today. Not even Hysamum smelled as flowery as this boy. "Understood, Captain. Is there anything else?" Perrin asked in a tight tone. Well, yes, now that you mention it, is Miss Jatesy enjoying the kitten? Anything to generate a conversation. Perrin knew the tactic, get the other side talking about something you have in common. He realized just then that all of the officers took a few courses in negotiations, but never had they negotiated with garters. Perrin didn't know why it never before occurred to him that all of the diplomacy classes were designed for officers to manipulate other soldiers and the citizenry. He employed a strategy, number 8, in avoiding a sticky question. Ask a stickier one in response. I've been wondering, Thorn, where exactly did that kitten come from? We don't have cats in the compound. Thorn's eyes lit up, as if he'd been waiting for the question. Sir, that is a strange thing, isn't it? Why, of all places, would a helpless creature be wandering around in such a dangerous place? Perrin's hand under the cover of his desk formed a fist. If Thorn dared draw a parallel between himself and the kitten, and Perrin was quite sure that the kitten had never been near the fort. He suspected that Thorn employed Raiden, who had delivered the basket, to snatch some kitten from its mother while he was evaluating empty barns to become storehouses. Immediately I knew, Thorn continued in a well-rehearsed speech, when I saw it bobbling between the cots, that the only person capable of taking care of such a needy living thing was your own very conscientious daughter. I saw her once in the garden last year, carefully tending to a row of corn, and knew that she... Perrin held up a hand. Let me get this straight. Because Jatesy flicks the bugs off of corn, you assumed she'd want a cat. He blinked at that. Well, no, not exactly following that chain of thought, sir. However, that was the thing about throwing people off their scripts, Perrin thought smugly to himself as he allowed his fist to unclench. If someone relays the truth, it's easy to pick up the thread again. But if it's a story they wove themselves, they frantically fuss over the sudden appearance of a rope they didn't anticipate, and generally tie themselves up in it. They taught recognizing this in command school too, but never taught how to disentangle yourself. Perrin settled in for the duration. He was more than capable of an extended head-to-head with the boy who coveted his chair, his fort, and his daughter. He sat back, confident that Lemuel Thorn wouldn't get any of it. It's well known, sir, that young women enjoy taking care of baby animals. Is it now? Interrupted Perrin. My wife's never mentioned that. Well, she's obviously a bit different then, sir. Really? How so? Not exactly knowing your wife, sir, I wouldn't dare hazard a guess. But, Perrin cut in frostily, you'd guess that my daughter would want a scruff of an animal that complains in a high-pitched whine day and night, which causes me to lose precious sleep again. Why? Did you think it'd remind her of you? Blank eyes stared back at Perrin, and Thorn's color faded a bit. That wasn't the intention, sir. It is, however, the effect. Then, with several layers of meaning that Thorn couldn't possibly miss, Perrin said, the next time you find a lost creature that needs saving, do us all a favor and throw it in the river. Now, anything else, Captain? Thorn took a nervous step backward, having understood enough. No, sir, I suppose not. One man sat in a dark office of an unlit building. It was useless. He couldn't think all alone. But he couldn't end it yet. So much remained to be done. All of his research needed to be compiled into the greatest evaluation of the animal nature of humans that the world would ever know, if he decided to ever let the world know of it. But it was useless. Nico Mal could only wring his hands while quietly cursing Perrin Shin and stare dismally at the empty chair. And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you.